Adele is our head of faculty. So Adele, I'm going to ask you if you can please be on mute patrol. I am just going to be sharing the presentation on behalf of our guests. So welcome everybody. We are ready to start. So with us this evening, we have our guest, Ms. Sushie Naidoo, who is an executive HR director. That is a really high level position. And I'm sure you are all aspiring to reach that level in the corporate ladder. So we are really excited to hear your insights for us. And of course, we are presenting a fairly new topic, but not new to HR. It's just a new change to legislation, which is making this presentation even more exciting and topical. So, Sushie, over to you. I'm going to be sharing your presentation shortly, and we are looking forward to the insights. Thank you so much.
Stunning. Thank you so much, Amy, and good evening to all. Thank you so much for making time to join us this evening. If you're just wondering where I am in the world, I drove down from Johannesburg. I'm currently in Umhlanga City and looking at the ocean. So if I get distracted, it might be dolphins that are jumping up in front of me. So it's really exciting to be here and be part of this. Just by way of introduction for myself, I've been in HR in various roles from recruitment, training and development. I spent quite a bit of time engaging and working with people with disabilities, then moved into the HR director role, and that's where I currently am. So very passionate about HR, people development, skill development, etc. So welcome, and I hope we're able to sort of share some or make this as interesting as it can be. So let's talk about employment equity, and that's what we're looking at today. We're going to look at the Employment Equity Act of 1995, what that actually means, diversity in the workplace. Onto slide 2 for me, please, Amy. That's where you are. Okay, thank you. So employment equity, are you on slide 2? Sorry, I can't see. Slide 2. There we go. Thank you. So we're going to go through a thought journey. Democratic South Africa's first steps towards addressing workplace inequalities of an apartheid state through robust legislative reforms to build an inclusive and diverse working population. So that was what the Employment Equity Act aimed to do. It aimed to address the past through robust, meaning aggressive reform, and to build an inclusive and diverse working population. 20 years on, and the moment is now right for us to redefine our goals. And what we mean by this, and so I've been working in HR for almost 30 years. And if you speak to somebody in HR, it's more around, were we just ticking boxes? And is it now the time that through the legislative changes that we're going to understand exactly where we need to focus, and we need to be aggressive in those areas. So I think that's in essence what some of the changes means. 20 years on, the moment is right for us to redefine our goals. Consider the practical lessons learned. So employment equity was new, and being a new act, there was various interpretations. So 20 years on, have we bedded those interpretations down in order to make informed changes to shape the next chapter of our future? We're going to look at the amendments to the Employment Equity Act. We're going to look at effective ways of addressing barriers to employment equity. And I'll talk you through the various reporting that has to go with employment equity, along with partnerships in the skills development space and visionary recruitment. How do we make this actually happen? It's not as easy or as simple as putting numbers down. How in practice do we actually get this going? So it's the route to realizing our employment equity ambitions lies in viewing diversity as a value add rather than a limiting factor. And we'll obviously talk more about that. The true meaning of a diverse and inclusive workforce. What does that actually mean? Okay, we can move on to slide 3. So the Employment Equity Act refers to the fair and equitable treatment of all employees, and this is as defined in the Act. It refers to the fair and equitable treatment of all employees in the workplace, aimed at readdressing past inequalities and ensuring that individuals, regardless of race, gender, disability, and/or other characteristics, have equal opportunities in employment and advancement. So a couple of important words there: race, gender, disability. By definition, previously disadvantaged refers to someone of color, so a female, as well as people with disabilities. These are your three categories of previously disadvantaged. It also talks about creating equal opportunities, and not only opportunities, but advancement. And this is where we talk about visionary recruitment, we talk about succession planning, and we talk about skills development. How does skills development fit into this? It encompasses the initiatives and policies designed to promote diversity and inclusion in organizations, striving to create a balanced workforce that reflects the demographics of South African society. There has to be policies that drive this, and there has to be an appetite from companies to want to engage in this space. By 2025, the focus on employment equity aims to comply with legal requirements such as the Employment Equity Act and foster an inclusive corporate culture that truly and actively values diverse perspectives and talents, ultimately contributing to the country's social cohesion and economic growth. In simple terms, it means exactly what I said. Companies, individuals need to have an appetite to drive this, whether it's from a succession planning perspective, whether it's from a recruitment strategy perspective, and skills development. How do we grow talent and combine it with skills? Okay, next slide. So there are other relevant legislation that shapes and guides employment equity. We have obviously the Employment Equity Act. The Constitution guides legislation around employment equity. Labor Relations Act. So those of you that are studying HR will be very familiar with these acts. Promotion of Equality and Unfair Discrimination. The Basic Conditions of Employment Act. So these are some of the acts that guide and shape the way we recruit, train, develop, and manage our equity status within our organization. Can move on to slide 5. So let's talk about how we, in practical, deal with employment equity in an organization. There are various steps that have to be followed from a company perspective. The designated employer must prepare and implement a plan to achieve employment equity. So in your larger organizations, you have specialists that work solely on employment equity. And again, those of you in HR will understand. Smaller companies, it sits within the HR function. Larger corporates have employment equity divisions on their own, just because of the volume of work that goes into it. But the important thing is that a company must have and present a 5-year plan. Have objectives for each year of the plan. Understand how they're going to achieve this plan and link it to your recruitment strategy and recruitment goals, coupled with that succession planning. How do we identify key individuals within an organization to move them into these roles, to create those opportunities, meaningful opportunities, sustainable opportunities? Include affirmative action measures. We just spoke about that. Have numerical goals for achieving equitable representation. And here we refer to employment equity, your reporting. The employment equity, the EEA2 and EEA4. EEA2 refers to your numerical goals. So it looks at an organization and the current view in terms of who is employed at this organization, Again, those of you in HR will understand the various levels. We have top management, we have senior managers, middle management, so level 1, 2, 3, middle management, junior management, skilled and unskilled. In companies have got to allocate numbers to this. What is the current view? What does our current workforce look like? Then we've got to develop a 5-year plan. So it's not going to happen overnight, but overnight's taken 20 years. What is our current view and what is the strategy year on year to ensure that we're meeting our targets? What are our targets? Are they achievable? The EEA2 looks at barriers. Why are companies actually not achieving these targets? It's all good and well. You know, in the early days, we put down numbers for the sake of numbers. We projected plans for the sake of doing it without really understanding, or having an appetite to actually meet these targets. But 20 years on, with the implementation of the new amendments, companies are being held accountable to achieve this, and we'll talk more about this. So the EEA2 looks at the numerical goals. The EEA4 looks at income differentials. So why are there income differences at certain levels? One reason that government has to have a view on this is to ensure that we're not fronting. You know, we appoint a person of color as a director, and there's a massive difference between the income of someone else within that level. So companies have got to report on income differentials and explain why are there differences. There are various reasons for differences. Length of service could be one. A person could be in an organization for a long time, could be sitting out of that band. Education could be one of it. Some companies reward education. So if you sit within a band, each time you achieve a qualification, your salary could go up. Skills. What are the skills that this person brings to the organization? The value that they're adding to their job. Seniority. So these are some of the reasons that there are income differences within bands, but it's up to the Employment Equity Committee or the person reporting to explain those clearly. And we'll talk about the Employment Equity Committees as well. Have a timetable for each year. Let's talk about the committee. An organization has to have an Employment Equity Committee. This committee has got to represent people of all the levels. So you have to have somebody from senior management, junior management, middle management, top management, skilled, unskilled, as well as male or female, plus from each demographic group, plus a person with a disability. Okay, so it's important that these committees are robust, that they have teeth, that they're functioning. These committees, by law, must meet 4 times a year. Larger companies choose to meet more frequently just because of the volume of work, but 4 times a year is minimum. And they're meant to have exactly what I said. They're meant to be impactful. The point of this committee is to unpack, besides understanding who's joining the company and who's leaving the company, to understand the recruitment strategy, to be able to say why and how was this placement made? What was the driving force behind employing this person? What does this person's CV look like? Can we unpack your selection process? Was that job advert fair? Or did it say must have 15 years of experience, which automatically excludes a large base of our population? So this Employment Equity Committee is vitally important in terms of guiding and ensuring and holding a company accountable to meeting their targets. Again, it must be robust. It must have teeth. It must have a proper representation. It must have people that come through with valid points, etc. Minutes of these meetings must be made available to employees as well. Have internal monitoring and evaluation procedures, including internal dispute resolution mechanisms. An employee of an organization is well within their rights to ask of their committee members to unpack the recruitment selection process in order to understand how a recruitment was done. Well, how is this person placed within our organization? What was the criteria? What was the job advert? So having the necessary bodies in place definitely gives teeth to this plan, without it just being a committee that exists all in the quiet. Identify persons, including senior managers, to monitor and implement the plan. When the employment equity consultant, or if it falls within HR, whoever does the plan, they've got to work very closely with senior management in order to understand this plan and to make it a real plan, make it one that the company can actually achieve, not just about, plugging in numbers that make it look good. So sitting with the skills development manager, training manager, sitting with line managers to understand where are the gaps and how can it be filled? What are the challenges in terms of getting the right candidates? Okay. On to slide 6. A designated employer must prepare and implement a plan to achieve employment equity. They must have objectives for the year and the plan. We spoke about that. They must include affirmative action measures. So when it comes to recruitment and including affirmative action measures, there are various thought processes out there. I think if you speak to 10 HR people, they'll give you different versions in terms of how to tackle recruitment, how selection comes about. How do we select? Do we select first and then look at equity? Do we look at equity candidates and select from there? I don't know the answer. As I said, each individual will have their version of it. At the end of the day, it's about not just selecting, but growing within your organization talent and people that can fill these roles. And I think for me, that's far more meaningful if we are struggling to meet our targets in certain sectors. Where was I? Slide 6, sorry. Such measures must include elimination of barriers. One of the barriers we come about is you find an advert that says, I'm looking for an HR manager with 15 years of experience. The labor courts, CCMA, are now viewing those criteria in terms of a selection or a job advert as unfair. Why do you need 15 years of experience? What is 15 years giving you? Surely 5 years would be enough. As somebody in a senior role, you can justify and understand 5 years. 15 years says I'm excluding a certain percent of our population. We need to look at measures that promote diversity. We're going to talk about diversity in our next few slides. Make reasonable accommodation for people from designated groups. When we talk about reasonable accommodation, we talk about how do we include people with disabilities. We cannot discount a person with a disability because we cannot accommodate them. Or can we? Again, I've worked extensively in the disability space, and there's two trains of thoughts there, yes and no. Companies want to shy away from employing people with disabilities because they believe it's hugely costly to them. They've got to suddenly, put in lifts, chair ramps, etc. So they shy away from employing people with disabilities. And now we're talking only physical disabilities, but it's about understanding different types of disabilities. We're not just talking physical disabilities. How do we reasonably accommodate? What does reasonable accommodation actually mean? So this is where training comes into place. Equipping managers to understand how to accommodate a person with a disability through sensitization workshops, engaging with the right professionals, etc. Not saying, well, as a company, we don't have a lift, so we can't employ people with disabilities. Understanding what the definition of a disability is and having that appetite to want to engage and want to employ people with disabilities. Preferential treatment and numerical goals to ensure an equitable representation. This excludes quotas. We don't work on quotas. We look at the right candidate with the right set of skills for the job. We can move on to slide 7. What are the employer's duties in terms of employment equity? One is to ensure that a committee is elected, that the committee is elected fairly and not just appointed by the organization. So it's very important that we are able to show that this committee that stands for employment equity was actually chosen by representatives of the organization and were not appointed by a company. As we said, report correctly on our employment equity 2 and 4. These are annual submissions. We've got to ensure that they're done. Manage the recruitment process. How do we recruit successfully to meet our targets? Again, the question, do we recruit equity candidates and select from there? Or do we define our position, we throw it out and hopefully attract the right set of candidates with the right set of skills, and from there we choose the right candidate? Again, various HR professionals have their own views on it. Link skills development to our employment equity plan. If we look at our employment, our EEAA 4, one of the reasons that companies use for not achieving their targets is they don't have the necessary skills. 20 years on, what have we done to ensure that we have these skills in place? How do we work with the CETAs to ensure that they create learning programs, support learning within the workplace? How do they assist organizations to grow these skills, develop these skills, so that we don't have that excuse anymore? How do we encourage line managers to look at succession planning? Look at staff within you that are showing potential. Plan ahead for the future. Develop a 5-year plan for this person to be able to move into the next level, the next role. These are things these are part of the employer's duties. Okay.
Sorry, guys, can we please mute ourselves? Sorry to interrupt the presentation. It's a big audience. We have to allow our presenter to unmute herself, which means we have to ask you all to please mute yourselves. Thank you so much, everybody.
So let's look at what some of the amendments are that have come through. Amy, I'm on slide 8 and then moving on to slide 9. So why have there been amendments? The view of the Department of Labor, transformation has not been driven correctly and has been slow. Employers have taken too long to actually achieve these targets. And I'll have to be absolutely honest, year on year, whichever organization I was in, we did not achieve targets, but we certainly had a set of call it excuses or reasons why. Did we actually do the best that we could have? I don't know. I don't think so. Okay, so government is saying 20 years on, it's not time for aggressive, robust changes. And so what they're doing is, instead of allowing companies to choose their own targets, they're now setting targets. They call them industry or sector targets. So sector targets will be set and monitored far more closely. Okay. I'm on slide 10. The disability definition, so another change is the disability definition. So the disability definition has been broadened to include people with disabilities and or special needs in companies. So not just a disability, there might be a special need that a person has within an organization. So people with disabilities have long-term recurring physical or mental or an intellectual or sensory impairment. How does a company not discriminate against them hiring a person with a disability, but actually embrace a disability recruitment or employment, and not just give somebody with a person with a disability a job? It's not a pity employment. People with disabilities don't want pity. They want meaningful work. They want to be treated fairly like anyone else, and they want advancement. And in my career, you'll hear my voice. I'm very passionate about that. I've seen companies tick that box, employ people, but there's little advancement opportunities. It's almost a case of my job's done. I've employed 2% of my workforce as people with disabilities. I don't need to do any more. We've got to treat a person with a disability as we would anybody else and ensure and cater for advancement in that employment. Companies with 50 people or less do not have to engage with the Employment Equity Act. They don't have to employ equitably. They don't have to submit any reports. So that's a new amendment. Okay. They can comply on a voluntary basis, but understanding unless this organization is part of a collective agreement or a bargaining unit, in which case then they have to comply. Okay. Section 15 says new sectorial targets will be introduced. We spoke about that, where we said government are not leaving it up to companies anymore to set their own targets. They are now giving you targets and will hold companies accountable to meeting those targets. I'm on slide 11. Section 16 talks about the consultation. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm trying to find who's unmuted themselves here.
We're hearing some nice music.
We're calling you out. You unmuted yourself, my friend. So please don't do that. Thank you.
Section 16 refers to an amendment that clarifies the consultation process between the designated employer and its employees, where there's a representative, a trade union. The employer must only consult with the trade union and not with its employees. So those are just sort of technical amendments that are made. So it's saying if there's a trade union part of the company, they don't have to engage with the employees. They need to engage with the trade union. Section 20 looks at the employment equity. Again, it talks about designated employers and that they must set numerical targets applicable to the sector within which they work. It's very important to understand what government are trying to achieve here. You can't have a blanket approach, or you can't apply just the EAP targets to certain sectors. Certain sectors like the manufacturing sector that have large numbers, especially at the lower ends, the employment equity stats have got to be will look very different to let's say an IT company that has 100 people. So you've got to look at the sector, you've got to look at the number of people in the sector, you've also got to consider the skills within that sector. Is it a new sector? Is it a sector that's been around? What sort of positions do we have? What skills development has taken place in the last 20 years to support that sector? And have we done sufficient, meaning, do we have the skills and can we actually achieve these targets? Okay. I'm on to slide 12. We spoke about sector. It talks about compliance again. These are just amendments to certain sections, which is section 42. It talks again about meeting sectorial targets. I want to draw your attention again, section 53. It talks about minimum wage. So section 53 says that sectorial targets can impact the employer's eligibility for awarding of state contracts. Okay. State contracts and employment equity compliance certificate criteria comply with the minimum wage. So any organization that's wanting to work with government must ensure, firstly, that they have their sector targets in place and that they've met their sector targets, that they comply with the minimum wage. No finalized CCMA unfair discrimination award has been made against them in 12 months. They've submitted their reporting and that they comply with their annual targets and their 5-year score. So what they're doing here is they're saying companies that want to engage with government must basically lead by example. Okay, that's what section 53 is saying. Any organization wanting work from the government must lead by example and must meet all of the criteria. Section 64 talks about a threshold, and that has been removed. We can move on to slide 13. Remaining the status quo, national or provincial EAPs are still in effect. So when an organization chooses to submit their targets, they have an option of either using the national targets or the provincial targets. If an organization is national, they have the option to use the national targets. EAP targets, meaning economically active population. So let me break that down. Targets are set per province. If we look at a province like the Western Cape has a large number of colored people. So the economically active population in the Western Cape will be different to the economically active population in, let's say, Gauteng. So the numbers are different purely because Western Cape have a large concentration of colored people, and the same is true for KZN. KZN has a large number of Indian people. So the employment economically active population will differ in KZN to any other province. Okay, so a company has an option to choose the national or the provincial targets and work towards it. Sectorial targets only applicable to the 4 top occupational level. That makes perfect sense. We're wanting to achieve advancement in careers for people at the top levels. We're wanting to impact top management, senior management, middle management, junior management. So that makes perfect sense. Sectorial targets will be set and measured over 5 years. So these are the new implementations. Acceptable, justifiable reasons and grounds for not achieving targets. So over the past 20 years, government has collated the various reporting reasons that companies have said are barriers, reasons why they were unable to achieve their targets. And these are some of the reasons that going forward might be accepted. So insufficient recruitment opportunities, insufficient promotion opportunities. Okay, insufficient recruitment opportunities means I said as an organization that within the next year, I'm going to ensure I have 5 African females as middle managers. Currently, I have 5 white males as middle management. If these males don't progress, move, retire, resign, leave, there is no recruitment opportunity. So that would be a reason why I was unable to achieve my target. Insufficient promotion opportunities, same thing. People at that level, there was no growth within the organization, there were no promotion opportunities, so hence an organization cannot meet its targets. Insufficient target individuals from designated groups with relevant qualifications, skills, and experiences. And this is where we said the employment equity plan must be driven by all senior managers within an organization to make sure that we're meeting our targets. So this is where skills development comes in. Companies need to show that now they're unable to meet their targets. However, these are the programs that we have. We will be passing on these qualifications to our staff in terms of succession planning to ensure that within the next 5 years, we have grown these skills within our company. And by then we should be able to meet our targets. CCMA awards or court orders, if a person of a certain group was unfairly dismissed based on race, color, or gender, and there was an award made, he or she can be reinstated, which means there's no opportunity to replace that position with an equity candidate. Transfer of business. If you take over a business, you take over the business with the current headcount. It means it's going to take you longer to transform that business. Same with mergers and acquisitions. Impact on business economic circumstances. So here, business would have to show that either the business size shrunk, creating no opportunities, or there was an economic reason why they were unable to meet their goals and targets. Okay, we can move on to slide 14. So what are the next steps? How are we going to do this? We spoke about discrimination. This is the definition of discrimination. The Employment Equity Act sets out the legal framework for promoting diversity and equality in the workplace. It aims to eliminate any unfair discrimination and to promote equal opportunities. Under employment equity, employers are required to implement affirmative action measures to address unfair discrimination, to promote diversity in the workplace. It includes setting targets. We've gone through that, we talk about designated groups. So the designated groups in South Africa are people of color, so Black people, women, people with disabilities. Black people include AIC, we refer to Asian, African, Indian, colored. That is your classification of Black people. Employers must submit annual reports. We've gone through that in terms of your EEA 2 and EEA 4. So let's look at diversity. The Employment Equity Act, we're talking about the objective again, to eliminate unfair discrimination in the workplace, ensure equitable representation of historically disadvantaged, promote gender equality in the workplace. And this is where women, empowering women, growing women within an organization is very important, gender equality, and provides guidelines for equal pay for equal work of equal value. You must have heard that phrase. And to measure that or to guide that and to monitor that, when we submit our EEA 4 plans, it talks about numerical differences. Why are there differences? One of the trends that can be picked up is, does an organization pay females less than males in the same role? And why? How do we address this? What is our policy? What is our recruitment practice? What is our payroll practice around this? How do we how do we rectify this? Equal pay for equal work of equal value. Male or female, it doesn't matter. It's the same output that the company is getting. Okay. Benefits of diversity in the workplace. Again, I spoke about an organization having an appetite, top down, from top management all the way down. Every single person in the organization must have an absolute appetite and must embrace diversity. They must understand diversity. What are the benefits of diversity? Embracing diversity in the workplace has numerous benefits for employees, including increased innovation, improved productivity, and an enhanced reputation. Diverse teams bring different perspectives and ideas to the table, which can lead to better problem solving and decision making. It's very clear we all come from different backgrounds, shaped by different upbringings, and what one person sees, another might not. So a diverse workforce will bring that different flair. When I lecture HR, I say to everybody, do you only have white shirts in your closet? Do you only have one color clothes? No, we have different clothes. We have pink t-shirts, red dresses, blue shorts, black jeans, and we choose depending on our mood. It adds a different flair, and that's what color does. That's diversity. We're not only talking race, we're talking gender, we're talking disability. It brings a different dimension to the workplace. But also important here is to understand a diverse workforce brings credibility to an organization. What is discrimination? This slide, I'm on slide 18. It talks about, it gives you a definition of discrimination. Examples of discrimination in the workplace include racism, gender inequality, victimization, discrimination against people with disabilities, and it also includes unfair treatment in the workplace, bias in hiring, dismissals, or disciplinary actions without valid reasons. Bias in hiring, I gave you an example. It talks about, I'm looking for an HR manager that must have 15 years of experience. Makes no sense at all. It's a clear indication of eliminating a large percent of the applicants out there. And that was a mouthful from me. And that's it for now. Amy?
Thank you so much, Sushie, for that amazing presentation. I'm really grateful that you could take the time to be with us this evening, and very insightful. I am the senior manager on the Employment Equity Committee here at IQ Academy. And so everything that you mentioned in this evening's presentation, I can resonate with. It's a challenge. The changes in the legislation are also challenging. There are certain industries or sectors, like we are in the education sector, and there are certain nuances in these sectors which make it actually very difficult to implement this. So, for an example, when they were doing the roadshows with our sector, the early education sector, so children, working with children, the difficulty in recruiting non-females, because that is primarily a caregiving role, is performed by females.
Yes.
But now there are
Yes.
sectoral determinations that you have to bring men into that environment.
Yes.
And what if they simply don't study that? What if there are
Yes.
simply no experienced people, but you are obligated, because of the sectoral determination, to try? So what you've said there is to validate why it's going to be a challenge for you. You can only get into trouble around this if you are fronting your appointments.
Correct.
And you are
Correct.
actually not making a tangible effort to try and recruit and promote within the business itself.
Yes. And I mean, safety could be a reason, you know. Do children at that level resonate better with a female? How comfortable would they be with a male? I don't know if that's that's a point. Could be a point.
Definitely. Okay, so we are going to open the floor for questions, but in order to facilitate the session from here, if you would like to ask a question, can I ask that you raise your hand? Alternatively, you can pop into the chat and pop your question in there, and I will read it out on your behalf if you don't feel like you're brave enough to come in front of the group. Okay, I see one hand. So I'll call your hand one at a time. And if you have raised your hand and you've given your question, you can then put your hand down and then I will regard it otherwise as an old hand. Okay, Lerato, you were first. Go for it.
Hi, thank you. So I wanted to go back on a point that you made about being biased when you advertise a post and things like that, like in what you need. So I just wanted to understand like the way forward. How do you do want a manager with certain years of experience or certain qualification? How do you word that correctly? Just so it doesn't seem like you are being biased, or you just post a random post to ensure that you want to include everybody, but you end up getting CVs that are not up to the standards that you want. I don't know if I'm making sense.
Yes. Amy, am I answering?
Yes, please.
Yes. Okay. So the point that we're making there is that, yes, you want experience. So if you said something around 3 to 5 years of experience, it means that when a person's in a role for 3 to 5 years, they have sufficient industry knowledge, they have a good grasp on that role. You can justify it like that. But so there is no actual number to put to it. But the point that is, if you put a number, you need to be able to justify why are you saying this number? What does 15 years mean? What is a person going to achieve in 15 years? Unless there's something that you absolutely can peg it down to, it's difficult to put down. It is viewed as, if you are saying 15 years, you almost want to exclude people, not include. So just be wary of the number of years. If you have a very valid reason, if, as an example, 10 years ago, a certain something was taught and only people that were in that industry 10 years ago would bring that experience, then by all means, you can put down 10 years. But be careful of putting down too many years of experience, because it can be seen as wanting to exclude people rather than to attract the right skill. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you, Sushie. Thank you, Lerato. So I just wanted to add to what Sushie was saying there. If you could think about it in a different way, what we're trying to guard against is somebody identifying a candidate before they even start the recruitment process and then actually tailoring that advert to only suit that candidate because they've already identified that person.
Correct.
So now everything that happens thereafter is actually just fronting. So you go and interview a bunch of people you have no interest in hiring. You can exclude them on the basis of the job description and the requirements of the job. And so that could be construed as actually being biased because you've actually already made your appointment. So you're actually just doing this now for a paper exercise. So that's, I think, or just to add to what Sushie was saying, that's what we're trying to avoid.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Lerato. Likaela? Okay, Likaela, I see you've asked a question. How can HR support employee well-being and mental health?
It's often a difficult one. HR are not medical people. So there are various companies out there. So as example, when through personal experience, we partner with companies that specialize in employee wellness. There's various things an organization can do, soft things to ensure that people are comfortable at work, create workplace forums, create workplace buddies, mentors, etc. But if you if you are concerned that somebody has a genuine problem, possible suicidal tendencies, then you don't want to bring that to the HR desk. Again, HR are not trained medical professionals. So companies engage with companies like ICAS, to give you a name. They are trained professionals for a minimal fee. They can manage your workforce. They can assist you. And very often, people in your workforce, especially when they're going through personal situations, don't want to talk to their managers. And the last person they want to talk to is the HR manager about this. So they want their issues to be treated very confidentially. So going to an external source sometimes is a better option. It depends on what you're dealing with. How severe is the problem? But guard against HR becoming these healthcare professionals trying to assist with employee wellness, especially in serious situations.
Thank you. Thank you for that question, Lekayla. I'm going to treat Lorato and Lekayla's hands as old. Leslie, do you have a question for us?
Hi,
thank you so much. The chat next.
Thank you so much for for the class and for the webinar. What I want to know is, how do you implement core values in a company that has no HR? So how do you implement certain well-being structures in a company that has no HR management?
So who is responsible for the HR function, if I'm to understand that?
That falls under operations, but operations and HR are two different functions.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's very difficult.
It is difficult because I don't understand the company. HR is an important part of any organization. Companies, I know various companies that don't have an HR structure. It falls, so payroll is all that they know, and it falls under the finance person. And finance people are the last people that you want to bring into HR. Totally different. So one of the things, so maybe this company is too small to support an HR department. You normally have an HR presence if you have over 50 to 75 people. An outsourced option, there are various companies that outsource to HR, where you have an HR business partner or administrator that can be on site maybe once or twice a week, filling that function. If this organization doesn't have the capability or capacity to have a full-time person, then they could make use of an outsourced person.
No, the company is quite a sizable company. It's more than 50 employees in the company. They just don't see the need for HR. So I just want to know, as staff, how does one implement sort of core values where respect is given to individuals, and where discrimination is not on the forefront? It's little things like that that does become an issue at the end of the day because there is no HR.
Yes. So I think the strategy is part of the overall strategy of top and senior management. It's something that they're driving. I think employee forums can be created where these discussions are taken to top management, taken to senior management to say, these are the benefits of having certain HR forums, like a skills development forum, an employment equity forum, an employee wellness body. So even if you don't have a full HR structure, but you have various bodies that guide these processes, and through that you can start to develop best practice within an organization. But it's ultimately up to senior and top management.
Make a lot of sense.
It's their vision, it's their vision that's going to drive how they staff up their organization. But creating workplace forums is definitely a starting point.
I'm sorry, Sushie, I have to add, I can't help myself.
Sure.
So I love what you guys are discussing, and I do have some experience in this as well. And what I would suggest to our guest is to engage with the responsible parties, if this company has more than 50 employees, they have to be employment equity compliant. They do not have a choice. So if they have more than 50 staff, they have to have workplace forums. They have to have employment equity committee meetings anyway. So what you could do or encourage the team to do is to engage with the supervisors and managers and actually get more information about what is going on in terms of employment equity movement within the business. Legally, you have to have your Employment Equity Act, Labor Relations Act, Basic Conditions of Employment Act on display in the workplace for staff. So that is a point at which you could engage with the management team and actually start to bring up this issue, because it is an issue that affects everybody in the business, as Sushie's mentioned, from the unskilled, the cleaners, right through to the CEO. So everybody has to be represented at this committee. And if the committee is only happening to have closed discussions that are not then shared with the bigger organization, that is a compliance issue. And there's no good or well-run business that would want to have these types of compliance issues.
Yeah.
You expose yourself to risk of fine and imprisonment. We call it the silver bangles. Nobody wants that. So your ultimate goal here is compliance. And in order to achieve compliance, you actually have to make demonstrable steps to achieve, diversity and equity. So holding
And
the
I
company
think just
responsible is
having-
important.
Yes. Just having a motivated staff that understand, or just a staff, motivating staff, having that HR structure where there's whatever HR does, people can resonate with that. There's a recruitment division, and they can see that this company is actually, there are very few companies out there that don't have an HR division. So I am a little bit confused, I think. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Leslie. Treating your hand as old. Amber, do you have a question for us? Okay, I see you've popped into the chat. There's quite a few questions in the chat, so I'm just going to address yours quickly. I just wanted to know if it's seen as biased when you have just completed a course in HR admin. Most of the places you apply to want 2 to 3 years of experience. What then should you do if the reason for applying is because you do not have the relevant experience?
That's always a challenge. How do you get the experience if you can't get the job, and companies want that experience? It is a difficult one. I don't know the answer to that, Amber. How do you get experience if an organization won't take you on? Possibly if you are employed, one way to do it is if you are currently employed and working in a different division, maybe do some job shadowing of the HR person and count that towards hours. If your organization will allow you to work closely with the HR person. Sometimes you might have to do it in your own time, but then you're able to count hours towards being in that HR environment. But again, difficult. You have the qualification, you can't get the job because you've got experience. You need experience. How do you get experience if you can't get the job? Yeah, so it's often a difficult one.
And sometimes it could be even entering in a PA role, secretary, reception. You might find that these more administrative roles could actually get exposure to some of the HR functions, like timesheets, leave requests, so you can slowly work your way up in an organization and get experience that counts towards your CV by even just, starting off in that more administrative role. Okay, thank you, Sushie. Daniel?
Yes, thank you. I have just a bit two short question. One, it's according to the candidate, sorry, without experience. So, is it like a for your requirement, for an example, you want a candidate who have, for an example, 5 years experience, but you on the interview you find out that sorry, that this candidate can have it can improve himself, but without an experience, are you going to take him, or just you are going to be focused on the requirement that you set? And the second, the last question is the difference between a human resource and the senior manager. HR and the senior manager, is it they are playing a bit the same role, excepting like a payroll, or it's totally different? Thank you.
Daniel, that first question, can you just go back to that first question?
Yeah, my first question was like a candidate who or the position that you advertise, it's according to a requirement, like you require 5 years experience. So
Right.
and you find out the candidate have a potential, and after like interviewing him, and you find out that the candidate it can improve himself, but according to your requirement it doesn't have 5 years experience. Are you going to appoint him or not?
Okay, I think it will depend on the other candidates or this candidate as well. So when we do selection of a candidate, we look at various criteria. We don't select a candidate based on just one criteria. So when you look at a job, you have maybe let's go back to recruitment. Recruitment is looking at a CV. When you match a CV to the job spec, okay? In a job spec, you have the minimum requirements. This person should meet the minimum requirement. So there's two ways to answer your question. This person, having not met the minimum requirement, might not be considered for the job automatically based on the fact that he has not met the minimum requirement. If the recruiter did not have sufficient candidates that met the requirement and this person was put forward, so let's say that using the 5 years, and they got 20 CVs, and of the 20 CVs, only one person had 5 years of experience, the others didn't. So then the recruiter would then look at the next round. Okay, so we can't find people with 5 years, so we can consider. So in one scenario, the person could be excluded because of not meeting the criteria. On the other hand, maybe the other candidates were not sufficient in meeting the requirements, so this person then can be considered. There's various ways to look at it. If this person did make it into the interview and there's different criteria that is used in selection, not only on experience. Maybe this person met the criteria, had the qualification, the education, the work experience, but was brilliant in the interview and they saw potential. Then this person could be considered. So when we do selection, we don't only look at the criteria, because it's assumed at selection stage that any one of the 5 people that you selected, if you closed your eyes, any one of them could do the job. But when you go to selection, you're now looking at who's going to be the best fit. Maybe he doesn't have 5 years, but he's going to gel with the team. He's going to be the best candidate. He doesn't have 5 years of experience, but the way he presented himself in the interview tells me I'm going to be employing a brilliant person for that job. So there's different ways of looking at it. Does that answer the first part of your question?
Very clear. Thank you so much.
Okay. Second part.
The second part, I was saying like the difference between senior manager and HR manager. Yeah, I can say. So they are playing the same role, or it's totally different?
So HR are responsible for various functions within an organization, depending on the size of the organization. If you have a large organization, you could have an HR team headed up by an HR director. Below them, different business units. There's recruitment and selection. There's training and development. There's skills development. There's IR. There's health and safety. There's various departments or sectors that make up the HR manager role. In a smaller organization, we have what you call an HR generalist who normally deals with all of this. Line managers deal with certain HR aspects. They deal with possibly the IR part of it, but it's two separate roles. Unless this organization says we don't have an HR department, all line managers will fulfill these HR roles. But it is two different roles, and normally companies separate line managers and the HR function. However, line managers are responsible to a certain degree for certain HR responsibilities of their staff, especially when it comes to managing discipline. And they're also very involved in the recruitment of their own staff as well.
Thank you so much.
Okay, we have a question from the chat. Ntandose. How can smaller organizations with fewer than 50 employees ensure that they are still making progress toward employment equity, even if they aren't required to by law?
Well, that's a brilliant question, and I think that shows progressive thinking. So they can get involved and start reporting, even though it wouldn't be a legal requirement, but it will still be accepted by the Department of Labor. So it shows that this company has a forward-thinking strategy. It has a vision that they're going to grow, and already gearing up for when that growth happens from a compliance perspective.
Thank you. Palesa, you're up.
Yes, I'm up. Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
That's great. Fantastic. I have one question, and I'm not sure if my question is going to be a bit off topic in terms of what we're discussing at the moment, but this is a question related to recruitment and selection. So I've been in quite a few roles in recruitment. I just have a questions around references. What does the law say about references? Is a company allowed to give a bad reference on someone? Or what is the law around that?
Did you say, is a company allowed to give a bad reference?
Yes. So if you find a candidate and you move them from the interview stage to whatnot, and you obviously want to appoint them, and then you get to the reference stage, and then you find that the manager is giving a really bad reference. So what is the law around that? Is it allowed? Because I think I've heard someone said that it's not allowed, but I obviously want to hear from a professional side if that is actually true.
And you know, Palesa, here again, if you speak to 10 people, you'll have 10 different versions and understanding of it. So let me give you what my understanding is. So let's go back to the definition of a reference. Why are we doing a reference? You're doing a reference, it's not a tick box exercise. You never want a reference where everything is glorious, then that's a red flag. So I think it's about not defaming the person, and about giving a fair assessment of the person. But even before that, it's important to understand the referee. Is this person suitably qualified to give you a reference? Was this person directly responsible for this person? Was him or her this person's line manager? If you can answer those questions, and then constructive feedback, we don't remember when you ask for a reference, you have a set of questions that you're going to guide the person on. It's not going to be just a discussion of, oh, the person was terrible, don't ever employ him. That wouldn't be the situation. It would be a question of, tell me about his time and attendance. And you want the honest truth. That's why you're asking for it. I've had situations where I've had references that have come out gloriously from recruitment agents, only to appoint the person and you experience totally different. I've then picked up that reference and phoned the person and said, you've given us this reference, and the person's answer was, yeah, but he was my colleague. I was not, his line manager. So in which case that reference should never have been taken in the first place. You asking for a reference for a reason. It's going to shape your judgment. So you want not the, it's got to be done professionally, if that's the way to say it. But you want to know this person that you're employing, how are you going to experience this person?
And correct me if I'm wrong there, Sushie, if somebody was dismissed, you can disclose that to an agency if they inquire, if the person has put you down as a person that you worked with and you worked at this company, and then the company is called, that company can disclose to the agency that you were dismissed or anything to
They
that
can.
effect.
They don't have to say the reason for the dismissal, but they can state, so did the person resign, retire? Was the person dismissed, retrenched? It is the reason for the termination, yes.
And I think what's important there, Palesa, is if you give a defaming reference, then there's a legal consequence for you, probably more likely as an individual. So rather than that person then being able to sue the company, but Sushie, you can correct me if I'm wrong there.
So remember, when somebody gives you a reference, so if I've left a company on a very seriously bad note, I was dismissed for theft, and am I going to give you Amy's number where you're going to phone Amy and she's going to give me that information? So the candidate should disclose to you, please note, I was dismissed from the company for this reason. There's obviously my version and the company's version. So they're disclosing to you what you're going to hear already. So it's not a surprise.
Mm. Yeah. Okay, thank
Amy?
you, Palesa. Yes.
Sorry, I've been sitting in darkness since the time we started at 6. The apartment that I'm in there seems to be load shedding. So if I suddenly disappear, forgive me, then it means my battery is dead.
No problem. I've been plunged into darkness as well. So
have
we
you?
will just get through this together.
Okay.
Okay, so we've got
Sorry,
a few more
everybody.
hands.
Apologies.
I'm going to wrap up just on account of Sushie and I being electricity-less. We're going to wrap up as close as quickly as we can. So Tasneem, we're going to take your question, and then I'm going to quickly go through the chats and see what questions we haven't answered, and then we'll wrap up by 7:30. Right, Tasneem.
Good evening, all. I just want to know regarding
Tasneem, I'm unable to hear you.
Okay. I just want to know if at the end of the study process, do you get like a recommendation letter, or to how can I say it, to complete your the practice? Like for instance, I'm done and now I want to go to work, or do you give or do IQ give a referral letter? For instance, I've asked my HR manager if I could shadow her, and I told her that I was studying online, currently busy studying, and she asked me if I have a letter or something that say that I can start my practice or something like that.
Okay.
Okay, I'll answer that one. Obviously, Sushie, you
Yes.
can't answer. Tasneem, the best that we can do is provide you with a proof of registration as well as your either provisional or final academic record. And you can use that in your academic record, depending on whether you're doing a short course or a qualification. We will list the unit names if it's a short course, so that your employer can actually see you've covered and passed recruitment and selection, or you've covered and passed labor relations, termination, whatever that was. That is what we can provide to you. So if you can just pop us a mail on, if you did a higher certificate, you can email us on studentadmin@RQA. If you did a short course, you can email us on scresults@RQA, and we will then handle your query from there.
Okay, all good. Thank you
All
very
right.
much.
Perfect. Okay, last few questions before we die from no electricity. Vicky, hello everyone. I would like to find out, in terms of reasonably accommodating employees who return from work from being homesick for long ill health, or one who has suffered a loss of significant loved one. Okay, so this is a different circumstance than perhaps an employment equity issue. How should one consider to avoid having other employees comparing their situation with those others or being treated with favoritism? And how does reasonable accommodation in that context actually look?
I'll answer it very briefly if that's okay, Amy.
Sure.
I know it's not a topic that we're discussing. So reasonable accommodation refers to accommodating a person with a disability, okay, or a special circumstance. So let's look at disability first. So reasonable accommodation means, what does the person need in order for them to be able to function as your other staff? So I'm a wheelchair user. In order for me to come to work, I need a ramp up to your front door. I'm a wheelchair user. In order for me to sit at a desk, my desk needs to be raised by 10 centimeters. Now, reasonable accommodation shouldn't deter employers from employing people. There's simple ways that we can do this, and so we want to encourage employers to embrace disability recruitment. So reasonable accommodation does not state that we rewrite basic conditions. It talks specifically about the person's condition and what is it that we need to do within the organization to accommodate that person. It doesn't talk about extending the person's breaks, changing start and work times, diminishing working hours, thereby making this person less productive. It does not mean that. And that is one of the big faults of people. People think, or companies or managers think, that if I employ somebody with a disability, I've suddenly got to throw my whole rule book out and accommodate this person. He pitches up to work at 9, works till 1 and leaves, and now the rest of the workforce is affected. That's not reasonable accommodation. Reasonable accommodation means small tweaks to the environment in terms of accommodating this person. Going back to the other question, the other part of your question, can the company accommodate this person? So we talk about incapacity. Are we saying that this person has suffered a loss and it created incapacity, meaning they were able to do and are not able to do? So there's many ways to look at it. If a person is incapable of performing their role, then we can dismiss for incapacity, but I sense we're not wanting to go there. We're wanting to rather accommodate. The law says if we accommodate, then it means that you can make changes. So I'll give you a simple example. You have somebody who's been a creditors controller, earning 35,000 Rand a month. She's suffered severe, or she's gone through some tragedy in her family. She's unable to fulfill that role. However, we can accommodate her at reception, but she's not going to do the job of the creditors controller. She's now going to be a receptionist. So we define the new role. We make an offer to say we can move you in. We define the period, and we look at the remuneration. It's got to be agreed by all parties. And here I'm giving you a quick version answer to that question. Okay, reasonable accommodation talks to a person with a disability in terms of accommodating somebody through another channel. Can the company accommodate it? It does not have to. There are other channels that can be followed.
Yes, definitely. So in our organization, we accommodate physically disabled staff members by allowing them to work remotely, allowing them to work on different channels or use different methods for work. If they have a hearing impairment, we don't expect them to work with headphones on. They will do more reading, typing related work. And
Right.
Similarly, if somebody is disabled, physically unable to access our workplace, we can still employ them and they can work remotely in their home where they are comfortable, and we can then accommodate them. So that is another example of reasonable accommodation, and it's actually very easy to do.
Yes. Yes.
Right. Last question from Francisca. Is it legal to recruit someone without notifying the current employers or without advertising for the position?
Current employer, meaning their employer?
I'm going to assume yes, which is not your responsibility to do.
Not your responsibility. You don't have to notify their employer. That would be their responsibility. And the second part, without advertising. So it would be irregular to make an appointment without advertising. And then again, it depends on the size of the company, it depends on the company culture, it depends on senior management, top management, their strategy, what are they wanting to achieve. But if we're looking at best practice, then no. In terms of a position, you should advertise the position. However, I have to say that I find that at our level 5, because we have such a large base of people, sometimes internal movement takes place without a job advert. But it is irregular in terms of making sure that people feel that the recruitment process is open, transparent, and a clear process and a trusted process. It should start with a job advert, whether internal or external. And sometimes that's a contentious point. A company has a prerogative not to recruit internally or to send the job advert internally. They can choose to send it external only, or both.
Okay, thank you, Sushie. So one last question here from Nwabisa. How does one balance between hiring on merit and also adhering to the EE guidelines?
So I think we kind of touched on that briefly. Employment equity also talks about making sure that the candidate has the right set of skills, the right qualification, the ability to perform in that role. That is first and foremost. Do we then recruit based on that and then find the candidate, or do we discount that, recruit for the candidate first and then match the skill? Again, different people will give you different answers. I believe that if we throw the advert wide enough, we should attract a variety of candidates and then screen candidates based on who you're looking for. So your criteria changes based on the candidate that you're looking. So I'm looking for a colored female. My selection criteria starts to tick that box. Does that make sense?
See. Okay, ladies and gents, I see a couple more questions. I see a couple questions not related to this prezzo. We are going to have another presentation next month. So Sushie was our first of 2 HR presentations this month. And the second presentation in April will be looking at skills development, and we'll be touching again on this issue of employment equity. As Sushie has said, part of how you can actually achieve your targets is to actually promote from within. And so you have a base, you usually have a very wide base of candidates to promote from your unskilled or your semi-skilled into your professionally junior and so forth. And every occupational level that somebody moves is considered a promotion and is considered an advancement towards employment equity. So even at your lower levels, you have to start, and remember this is a 5-year plan, so you have to start by first looking, where do we want to see ourselves in 5 years from now? So Sushie mentioned this earlier. If you want to see 4 African managers within a middle management position, you don't necessarily need to look outside of the business. You can actually look inside the business, and through your performance appraisals over that 5-year period, you can identify the skills gaps. You can identify the willingness and the passion, who actually wants the promotion, who's actually putting that effort in. That's where you start to identify merit. So you first identify who is your candidate base, who's your pool, and then how are you going to elevate those people within the existing roles into different occupational levels, and how are you then eventually going to end up, if you can see there's actually a 55-year-old, maybe a white man, in a middle management position, and you know in 5 years he's going to retire, because that's your company policy, he's going to retire, so I need to actually upskill to make sure that I can actually replace him. I don't need to wait until he's retired. I can actually start that process now. So what we've said this evening is that you should consistently engage as individuals yourselves with your own line manager about your own development requirements, your own development needs in your performance appraisals. Use those opportunities to talk about skills. We'll talk about skills again a bit more in April. And we'll have this conversation now as it's actually skills reporting time anyway. So that is why we've invited Sushie, and then next month we will have another guest presenting around these issues. Thank you very much, everybody. Our lights have returned, unfortunately not for Sushie.
No, I need to contact the owner of the unit to find out why I am in darkness.
But thank you, everybody. Thank you for your time this evening. Thank you so much to our guest. Sushie, your insight is 30 years of experience. We can only aspire to get to that level of knowledge and that wealth of experience. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us this evening, and for actually giving your time to our people this evening to help them understand, you know, what we can all do about this. And it's not a punishment, it's actually an opportunity.
Thank you. It's brilliant to see
Beautiful.
so many people that have joined so late. So well done to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
And I appreciate that. Thank you,
Amy,
Amy, for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. So it's recorded. We're going to upload it tomorrow onto our YouTube channel. We'll send another com out with the recording link. And if you have some time, you can go and give it another look and look at your employment equity plans while you are looking at the recording. Okay, thanks, everybody. Thank you. Have a beautiful evening.
Thank you.
I'm
Bye.
going to close the session, and then I'm going to slowly kick you all out. So you're welcome to leave voluntarily, but you're going to get kicked out at some point. Have a wonderful evening, everybody. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, everybody. You're welcome to leave. 2 more minutes.